Hey guys, welcome back to the Dr. Cliff Show. I'm Cliff Olson, Doctor of Audiology and founder of Applied Hearing Solutions, and I'm extremely excited for today's episode. Dr. Rachel Cook and I are interviewing a very special guest, and that guest is Dr. Emily McMahan, who's an audiologist up in Alaska. Emily, thank you for joining the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Awesome. So tell the viewers a little bit about yourself and your clinic.
I have been a practicing audiologist for 10 years. The majority of my time has been physically spent in Alaska, but I do see patients all across the western United States. So it's kind of a hard answer. It depends on where am I going to be for the day or for the weekend, it seems.
So I think a lot of people, they think of, man, an Alaskan audiologist, are you literally out in the bush and people have to, like, and I even mentioned this to you last night, like, do people fly bush planes in to see you up there?
So I am not in the bush. I live in Anchorage. I'm definitely more cut out for Anchorage. I will go and play rural audiologist every once in a while, but I choose to stay in the city. We do have patients that literally come plane, train, boat, 5, 6, 7, 8 hour drives to see us in our clinic. Literally. Sometimes they will come 6 hours to get fit, or they'll come 6 hours for a remapping of their implants. So it is a little bit different than what your guys' patient demographic is complaining about, like 10 minutes of traffic or 10 miles.
Yeah.
Mine might have no choice but to spend a night or two in order to come in and get their services taken care of.
That's
Sure.
right, backpacking across the state, largest state in the United States, right?
Yes,
So,
we are quite significantly, even though Texas is not happy to hear that.
Yeah.
That's funny. So, so your clinic up there in Anchorage, Alaska, we really want to know the story and the journey of you and literally how you got into audiology and then ultimately what took you up to Alaska, because I don't believe you're from Alaska, are you?
I am not. I'm from the Cincinnati, Ohio area. So I did my undergraduate at University of Cincinnati. I did my doctorate program at Salus University in Philadelphia, and I was determined to do my residency year in Alaska. That's where I was going. Why not?
Why not?
I guess,
Okay,
why not?
fair
That is
enough.
why not? I had visited several years prior, between my freshman and sophomore years of college, on a vacation with family, and I had just loved it. And not at the time, I was not married at the time, but my then now husband and I were like, we don't have any belongings. We have 2 dogs.
Yeah,
and
let's just go.
why not? When is a time in your life that you're an adult that you often have the ability to just kind of start over?
Yeah.
So we just figured, why not? And 11 years later, we are still in Alaska.
How
Right
cool.
on.
So,
It's actually the top of my bucket list.
Come up.
I want to go visit Alaska. That's the number one thing I want to go do right now.
All right.
In the winter time for the Iditarod, right?
Well, no, because you know I won't survive. I won't make it. Cold, me, not the greatest of friends. So I'll have to come in the summertime because I hear it's
maybe
pretty
come
nice.
in the summer then.
Yeah.
I don't come to you in the summer. You don't come to me in the winter. We can agree on our
Fair.
climates of which we don't coexist very nicely.
Definitely.
But yeah, so when I went up there, I completed my 4th year. I loved the people. I loved the city. I loved the environment, and I loved the challenge. And in an area where you have a lot of audiologists and a lot of patients and people, there's not always the same opportunity for growth that there will be in other areas. And in Alaska, there were several long-standing practices, and things hadn't been done in a new way for a very long time. And I was a young and excited and ready to go provider, and I had exciting ideas that I wanted to see, and best practices, and being able to say, like, we have good data on why we should be taking these next steps, and I want to be able to implement them and do them. And so I decided that I was going to do it on my own. So not even 18 months after graduation, there I was, paintbrush in hand one day, because we didn't have enough money to hire remodeling crew, and my husband and I started out, and 8.5, almost 9 years later, we now have 2 physical practices and then a very large telemedicine practice all across the country at this point.
So what was kind of the inspiration to go into private practice specifically? I'm sure that there were rotations that you had as a student, or even the 4th year placement that you did. So what kind of led you into the private practice aspect? Because you can do best practices in a variety of different formats, really.
Yeah, so I always kind of joke and say I don't play well with others, and not in a lack of teamwork way, but just in I want to be able to create. I want to be able to say, here's how I want to see my patients, here's how I want to work with my patients, and let's implement that.
Yeah.
And often when you are either an employee or you're in a larger institution, they have a rubric or a system, and they don't often encourage leaving that process. And so if I had been in an area that allowed for that creative being of a provider, in the sense that these are your patients, see them appropriately as seeing fit, I happily would have and could have, stayed in other areas. I did a brief stint at an ENT, and that was a very brief stint, and I think we all were very thankful when I was no longer in that ENT practice. I'm still friends with the physicians in that practice now, but we all agreed I was better not being an ENT audiologist.
And that was like in your rotations that you figured that out?
That was while I was working on starting my own practice.
Oh, wow.
And so they knew what I was up to. I knew what I was up to. So there was no secrets there. But it's hard when you have this mentality for like, I want to do more. I want to take it to a higher level. I want to have more ownership of the process, the patient, the experience. And they're like, shh, that's not what we do here. Everybody's treated the same.
Yeah.
Every provider has to do the same. And when you have a myriad of providers, some of which don't follow best practices, or some of who want to cut corners, or some of who want to just show up to work, do the minimum and run away, or maybe they just don't have the knowledge because they've, just for various reasons, it's hard in an environment like that to really be able to put your best foot forward when you're being told by upper management, we all need to behave and act the same way when we're seeing patients, so that your patients don't feel they're either receiving more or receiving less than your colleagues' patients in the same entity.
Sure.
And so for me, that was just something very quickly early on in my career that I didn't want to just be status quo. I didn't want to just practice audiology the same way that everyone practiced audiology. And so that was a very quick decision of, there went my 5-year plan of owning of like, guess we're going to do this now.
Right.
And it's just kind of been
I think
a
having those
forward path.
experiences kind of like pushes you quicker into doing something you knew you wanted to do, but you kind of wanted to get some more, in my experience, some experience under my belt.
Right.
Working for a clinic, and I worked for an otologist for a while, maybe like 8 months until I'm like, okay, that's 8 months is what I got.
I made it 8 months also in the ENT world, and like I said, I still speak to those several of those physicians highly and well respect them, and we work nicely together, and just wasn't meant to work within the same parameter in the building.
I think, and so Dr. Cook, you actually had some ENT experience there as well.
Same, almost nearly the same length of time too. So it's almost sounding like a rite of
story.
passage. It's like, you got to go in, you got to work for an ENT office for at least a year. Okay, now you can do whatever else you want with the rest of your career.
Well, and I mean, I'm sure for both of you then, I saw many things during that time frame. Excellent pre and post operative. We got to see losses that I wouldn't have generally seen if I wasn't in a surgical environment. I got to scrub into the OR. I got to see fabulous cases.
Yeah.
And it certainly was a wonderful place for learning. As a younger audiologist, I had literally everything at my fingertips, and then fabulous physicians that were willing to say, hey, here's what you're seeing, this is what you're doing, here's why I recommended this versus not. So I mean, excellent learning experience, and I still take so many of those lessons and bring them into my practice now. It just definitely wasn't going to be where I stayed for my clinical career.
Yeah, I know for myself, I really did not want to do a well-rounded fourth year. I knew I wanted private practice, but my clinical coordinator was like, Cliff, you need more well-rounded understanding of audiology. And so they wouldn't even approve me going to just like a hearing aid clinic private practice. I couldn't do it. So I had to go to a place that was more diverse. And I have to say, just like you said, it was probably the best thing that could have happened to me, because it gave me an understanding, at least, even if I wasn't like an expert in every area of audiology, it gave me an understanding of all of the different areas. And now I can speak to those much more effectively because I have that understanding. But I also think that we learn as much from places that we don't like how they do things as well as the good places.
Oh, yeah.
So
some of my biggest life lessons have been what not to do moving forward. Sometimes more than what to do. It's been, I don't want to replicate that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that's true for everything in life, honestly. Learning what not to do is just as important.
That's exactly right.
If not more,
right?
Exactly.
So then talk to us about your clinic that's up in Anchorage. In fact, 2 clinic locations, both under the same name, I presume. Yes. Tell us about that clinic, and then what you did starting up with it, because you probably expanded your service offerings as time went on, but tell us like the initial startup process there.
Yeah, so initial startup was diagnostic hearing and tinnitus evaluation. Both children and geriatric population. I had done rotations through Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, so CHOP, and then in the location where I had done my 4th year, also saw pediatric patients. So I do provide both pediatric services and geriatric services. in my location, I do predominantly geriatric services, but we do a lot of pre and post tube, speech delay, seeing those little earlier intervention kiddos, newborn hearing screenings. Alaska has a lot of children born outside of the hospital system, and so we'll see a lot of those little newborn babies that maybe were born at home, born at a birth center in various places, and they didn't receive a newborn hearing screening. So we see lots of those itty bitties, but we have a fantastic school district system set up within the state, and so our school-aged kiddos have all of their services taken care of by our educational audiologist. And so, we see them kind of here, and then we see them a little bit, but then most of their school age services are taken care of at the educational level. They'll come in for fittings at the private practice level, but then their ed odds will take care of all of their FM, their cleanings, their checks, ear mold impressions, and everything like that. So a little bit of back and forth that we work with that smaller population. So that was our bread and butter. Testing, medical referrals back and forth, obviously amplification, and working it from that angle. Being in Alaska, we have always done some different telemedicine. Even pre-COVID in Alaska, we've done telehealth. So that's something that's been a part of my practice since 2017 is when Alaska brought in different telemedical rules. And so we've held a special license to perform telemed in the state since that
Fairly
time.
favorable rules, would you say, for that?
You just have to have a separate business license, and there's a couple little entities that you have to have available to be able to do it. It's not difficult to get, but it is a little step in the process, so to say, because I serve a rural population.
Right.
Some of my patients live close, and some of them literally live hundreds and hundreds, if not potentially more miles away from me.
Yeah.
And so when you see people like that, sometimes the weather's bad. They will try to come in on a bush plane and they cannot, or the weather is, they've made it from flight 1 to 2, but then they got grounded in flight 2, and so they didn't make flight 2 of 3. That's not their fault any more than it's my fault, any more than it's your fault. And so we've got to come up with creative ways that we can still keep them in their hearing health care, keep things going well, and make sure that we're keeping everybody happy, healthy, and able to, kind of finagle the schedule. So it's a little
you really
wild.
started with telehealth when telehealth
was not a thing.
became available for audiology services, because until we had Bluetooth-enabled hearing aids, you could not render telehealth services other than maybe doing like a FaceTime or a Zoom and saying, let me walk you through how to change your wax guard, or let's see if we can brush those mics off or something, but you weren't able to make changes and things.
Not that early. And so we got to be a part of some of the piloting programs for a couple of the different companies, because they needed practices that were either comfortable or familiar and had the patient base that was able to do it. So we got to do some piloting of both synchronous and asynchronous telehealth appointments in the very early world of what those look like. They have all come so far, thankfully.
I was going to say, I bet that was awesome and awful at the same time, because
there'd be days and you're just like, if only you were closer and I could fix this for you. I know we're just struggling here. So to be fair, it has come so far.
Yeah, it really
Since
has.
that began, telehealth is such a seamless part of our practice now. In the early days, it was a little bit laborious, and everyone had to learn. And now it's just literally what we do every day.
Yeah, separate apps, separate logins, your own separate logins.
Sometimes passwords, sometimes not.
Do 1 hour for a 15-minute appointment.
Do they even have strong enough internet to be able to? Gosh, so many considerations with that. Wow.
But honestly, the asynchronous for that would probably be helpful, right? Because you can send them a package and then wait for them to, get Wi-Fi to upload the package.
And in some of their locations, they don't necessarily have the ability to do synchronous changing. They might have enough to stream with me, but they don't have enough to stream with me and make changes. Or they might not have internet in their home, so they go to like a community center and they use the internet from there.
So it's not strong and it's not reliable.
And some of the villages have fabulous internet. Some of them don't. Some of them are in places where they can't access it during their workday. Some of them have, especially if they're up in our northern slopes, so like our oil fields, they have different clearance levels, so we can't have certain things on. So so there's a lot of different nuances that we have to work through every day. And so depending where they are, synchronous works, asynchronous works. Sometimes intentionally I will have a telehealth session with them. Intentionally I'll make changes and tell them, don't even attempt to upload these until later, knowing what their parameters are in their workforce. And so then they'll let me know later, or when they come back from their 2-week on or 2-week off, depending what it looks like, and we might have to make changes after that.
Wow.
So it's always a little bit of an adventure.
Wow. Well, that's so cool, though. I mean, it came out of need and necessity, but the fact that you're able to implement it and then feel really good about it now, like we do a lot of remote care in our office as well. And we also have patients that are states away, countries away, and it's like, it has opened up these doors to just, I can still be your provider even when you can't come in to see me.
All the time.
Yeah, it's so cool.
The difference is they wouldn't be receiving care then.
Right.
Traditionally, they're not going to go receive alternative care. They're just not going to receive care.
What's alternative care when there is no alternative?
When there's nothing. And so, and that's where thinking outside of the box is, have you really done someone a service by providing them a service, and then there's no follow-up care? Not because they don't want to come in, not because you don't want to provide it, but if they don't have a way to get you, they don't have a way to be able to come in. Maybe they financially can't afford to leave their place of living. For me, sometimes they can't come in the winter months, or they can't afford to leave in the summer months because they're harvesting, they're gathering, they're heavy fishing.
Yep.
Leaving is the ability of not having the ability to sustain because they're doing all those activities. Whereas I can have a 15, 20, 30-minute appointment with them. That doesn't pull them out of their home. It doesn't pull them out of their livelihood. It doesn't pull them out of their ability to function. And I still know that we're then providing them appropriate follow-up care, keeping them in their appropriate whatever it is that we're doing with them, because the alternative is I might see them once a year,
right,
on a good year.
Yeah.
Whereas I can now know that I am following quarterly visits with them. We can still have regular touch points. We can see them. We can take care of them and know that they're still safe, happy, home, and well cared for. I'm still able to follow up with them. We have good rapport. We have good relationship, and we're keeping their hearing health needs taken care of. Whereas if not, I might see them once a year or once every other year because that's how often they come into town. And that's a lot harder to take care of someone if you haven't seen them in a long time.
Yeah.
You don't have a good trusting relationship with someone that you every once in a while see.
Yeah.
And so, it really just expands that ability for us to work with them, keep them happy. And then our office line that we use is help you hear the life you love. And if your life and hearing the life that you love is at home and it's in your village and it's fishing and it's hunting and it's doing those activities, I don't need to take you away from that.
Yeah.
Let me help you hear the life that you love. And I can do it from my office and you can be there. There are some requirements. I do need you at some point in my office. We need to be able to run Relay. We need to check your hearing aids if you're having problems. I want to be able to run test box measures, and we need to check things. There are certain steps we can't skip, but that doesn't have to be every single appointment.
Yeah.
And in a way that would be detrimental to our patients. And so
I think it's important to note that, doing the remote care side of things is a supplement to the things that we need to do from a standards perspective inside of audiology. That's why it's not okay to just 100% procure treatment online and assume that you're going to be getting that treatment administered the right way. But there are ways to incorporate, telehealth into a successful, standard of practice.
And I like to look at it more of as a hybrid approach, because I do not believe in fully removing the physical appointments. There's too many measures that are both physically tangible as well as the relationship portion that are crucial. They're crucial for success, they're crucial for validation, they're crucial for knowing that I've actually done an appropriate fitting and measurements on you. But then also there's the human aspect of it. We need to know, how do I know, are you doing well? Can I see that you've done that? Are you actually being successful in this and working towards that? But absolutely, we can supplement and have those follow-up care visits. And sometimes we have to say, you know what, this is just not telehealth appropriate at this point. And then we've got to figure out, how do we either limp along until we can get you in, because maybe you really truly can't come in right now, or how do we work on getting you into the schedule, or potentially it's that I'm coming down into your area. Pre-COVID, we did field clinics throughout Alaska. Since COVID hit, our villages have not reopened widely to external healthcare coming into the villages. We live in a state that is very remote in terms of wide access to healthcare. And so because of that, I have not been able to restart up my traveling clinics within my state just because of the parameters that have been set in place. But previous to that, I could quarterly go into some of those different areas regionally, and then they could plan on coming into me. And so, it's always just about, how can I bring those services to you to keep it friendly, to keep it working, that way everybody is able to get the best hearing health care that they can receive.
Oh, totally.
So you pretty well laid out the process that you go through from a testing standpoint, fitting people with hearing aids, providing them with best practices and the standards of care at the onset of that, and then providing them with telehealth if necessary. And then some people obviously will continue on just physically coming into the clinic, because Anchorage has how many people again?
About 450.
Right.
So yeah, we have plenty of people that never want to do telehealth, and
For
they
sure.
always
and
just
they always
come
want
in.
to come in, and they get their snowshoes and
They get coffee and snacks and come in for a visit, and that's also fine. We have some patients that never ever want to do telehealth, and we are a full service clinic. They may come into us anytime they choose to.
Now, you had just mentioned earlier that you also do cochlear implant mapping. So kind of explain how you work that into your clinic and when that really came about.
So we I had learned implants as a younger audiologist and then had stepped away from that when I started my practice. I needed to be able to focus, and that was not an area that I was focusing on.
That's a lot to take on as a new grad in a new area.
Yes.
Just starting up a practice.
So that was my COVID project.
Oh my gosh. Well, that
was my COVID project was, you know what, I had enough patients at that point who wanted to get implants, needed to get implants, and I'd always done the testing side and then referred to colleagues who provided implants. But I had enough patients at that point who had said, I want an implant, but I'm not going to do it unless you're going to be my audiologist. And so they won because I didn't have an excuse at that point.
Jeez.
I know, I didn't have an excuse at that point. You know, we were pretty low on physical patients with the constraints that we were under. And so I signed up to be part of the Cochlear Provider Network. I'm also part of the Pacific Northwest Consortium, which is a surgeon out of Seattle and then multiple audiologists within like Washington, Oregon, even like northern Idaho. There's a big group of us, and we work with a couple different offices and some different surgeons' offices. I've got at least 2 consortiums because my implant patients might actually go to Washington and get implanted, or they might stay in Alaska. It kind of depends on what their preferences are, but I have a surgeon in Alaska that we can use, or a surgeon they go down to Washington. And so once again, we use telemedicine for that as well. So they only have to go down the day before their surgery. All their preoperative stuff is handled within the state. Then they fly down. Postoperative care is handled within the state, within our office, because once again, cameras and telemedicine are fabulous. So 2020 is when I brought implants into the practice. 2021, we started doing auditory processing. So 2020 was implants, which I had done previously, and so that was kind of resurrecting a skill that I had not used in a while. 2021, we started doing diagnostic testing for auditory processing. We're still doing the diagnostic side of APD. I have a colleague, Dr. John Coverstone. He's been coming up and helping our clinic doing quarterly testing and then advanced treatments. It's an area he's very near and dear, and I'm working with him to better kind of work through my skill set on those services too.
We don't talk a lot about auditory processing disorder. Can you explain to the viewers just a basic high level, what is that?
Sure, so basic high level is often, this would be someone, we're going to talk about kiddos for the moment, this is your child who you've sent them in for a hearing test, their teachers say they're not listening, parents are saying they're not listening, something seems not quite right, but they pass every hearing test, or they're passing different things, but they're struggling, they're having a hard time. That's the kiddo you can look right at and you feel like you're saying it, and they are just they're struggling. It could be in quiet, it could be in noise, it could be the kid one-on-one, they're thriving, but the second you put them in a noisy group environment or in a gym activity or a classroom that's busy, you just kind of watch them just kind of disappear for a little bit. Those are the kiddos that can be described as maybe they're really fidgety in school, or they're having difficulty, and they're not bad kids, but they're not able to hear and listen and process like the 3 of us are sitting here and having an easy conversation. This could be detrimentally difficult for them. And so there's a myriad of things that could be a weakness with auditory processing. It's not a one size fits all. It could be just right-sided, it could be just left-sided, it could be both ears. If they have other diagnoses like dyslexia or potentially like attention deficit disorder. So there's multi-facets that can be added into it, of course, which will just make every individual situation unique. But if they're having difficulty being able to receive the information, process that information, and then regurgitate that information in whatever form that is. Maybe it's writing, maybe it's listening, maybe it's being able to orally represent that information. That could be a very difficult process for them. Sometimes it's a matter of doing oral rehab and training, so listening exercises, reteaching them to do those listening exercises. Sometimes they need amplification. Maybe they have normal hearing, but their brain needs just a little boost of like a signal to noise ratio to just help their brain get that better processing. Sometimes it's a combo of oral rehab plus amplification. Sometimes in a classroom they need preferential seating with a little mic, but they don't need on-ear, just like a desk microphone. So there's a variety of ways that it can manifest and ways it can look. Also can work into like a 504. If they already have an IEP, you can add that into their IEP into the classroom, so that way we can best support these kiddos. In adults, it's going to look a little different because we don't have the safety net of schools and individualized learning plans and those like safety parameters. But in kiddos, that can be the difference of a child that could struggle through the school system versus figuring out what is frustrating and difficult for them and then watching them succeed as soon as we figure out how do you best communicate and what does that processing look like for you. Here's how we enable you to have better processing, and here's what that looks like in your situation. So
just
it's
some extra
a bit of a
support.
puzzle,
It is.
and one that I am still also yet learning, which is why I have some colleagues working with Dr. Andrea Alexander. I have taken her course, and then I've got Dr. John Coverstone, who comes into my clinic, and he and I are working with those patients. So it's a continuing learning process, but it is an important area that I feel like often gets overlooked.
Yeah, definitely.
What does auditory processing disorder look like for adults?
So for adults, it can look similar. So we've got a gentleman right now who is a veteran, and he has struggled for years. He does well in quiet. He's always performed well, but he melts in the presence of any type of background noise. He had a lot of disciplinary issues while he was in the service. He did well one-on-one, but as soon as he'd be in his large group or as soon as he'd be out in the field, he struggled, and he was always kind of labeled as, a disciplinary concern. And he's going through testing right now, and he's been diagnosed, and there's solutions that we can work on. So he's going to be working on getting fit with amplification. He's someone that the type of processing disorder he had, he should benefit from an improved increased signal-to-noise ratio. And then we'll work on some auditory listening and retraining skills with him. But as an adult in the workforce, he is frustrated. He knows he doesn't do well in group settings, but his job requires him to be in group settings. He knows that that's a point of contention, and you'll just kind of watch him melt down, which is frustrating to him because he can function. He's a very high-level performer, but then he also recognizes that that's a detriment to how he functions and performs. And so then it's caused him to kind of pull back, lose loss of promotion, not be able to fulfill and function in some of those areas. It could be, for other adults, it could be that person that just seems to check out in group conversations. They do great one-on-one, they don't want to process. It could be someone that just says, I don't like to do activities because they're frustrated or they're exhausted. You can watch them trying to be engaged and just feel like they're not able to connect. Noise tends to be one of the bigger culprits with it because it's convoluted and it's messy and it makes listening hard even if you don't have a difficulty. So noise tends to be where we see a lot of our auditory processing individuals that have difficulty have the most trouble, just because it's just that much more messy of a signal.
Right.
For sure. Now, one thing that you're extremely well known for is tinnitus. So I know that a lot of our viewers enjoy hearing about tinnitus. Dr. Cook, you speak mostly about tinnitus relative to me, right? You speak a lot more about it.
I love it.
Yeah, you love it. So
I love it. There's still a lot to learn.
There's a lot to learn.
So I'm looking forward to this.
So yeah, I'd like you to kind of dive into, when you started tinnitus, what things you love about treating individuals with tinnitus, and then different things that you're doing to do treatment.
Yeah, so I started my tinnitus journey really early into audiology. My mom has tinnitus, and that was something, who doesn't want to help your mom?
Right.
So that was something I was always interested in. And I took my first tinnitus course, and it was just not enough. I needed more.
Is it ever enough?
It's never enough.
Okay, just checking.
Certain classes I took were more than enough, and I never want to take them again, but not for tinnitus for me. And so you had jokingly said earlier you needed a more well-rounded rotations. I lovingly harassed a tinnitus practice in Pennsylvania in the Philadelphia area to let me in, that they did not take students. And I was like, I need to be here. I need to be here. And I broke her down. And now she is not only one of my dear mentors, but also a dear friend and colleague. And so Dr. Gail Brenner has a practice. And so she took me under her wing and let me in her practice. And I got to stay not one, but 2 rotations, because the first one was her hearing aid side. And then my school said I couldn't stay, and I was like, I'm staying. And so I got to stay in the tinnitus side of the clinic.
It seems like something you do.
Absolutely.
Listen, I'm staying.
Yeah,
I know you're saying I can't, but I'm going to.
You said I'm not going to, but I'm telling you I'm not leaving.
I liked the phrase,
cancel the other one.
Lovingly harassed.
Yeah, lovingly harassed.
I'm going to use that. Sometimes you have to lovingly harass people
like,
to
I really
get what
want
you
to
need.
be with you. Please let me come be with you. Yeah. And so I got to spend my entire 3rd year within her hearing and tinnitus practice.
Wow.
And that really heavily influenced and just only further sparked my love and my want and my need for more.
Gives you so much time to settle in.
Yeah,
because
if not,
otherwise you get right to the point where you're like, oh, I'm starting to feel good. I'm starting to hit my stride.
And then you're like,
gotta go.
Yeah, gone. And so because I got to be there for such a long period of time, I was comfortable. I knew the clinic, I knew the staff, I knew the team, I knew the patients, both new and old, and you're really a part of the team at multiple rotations in a location. And so I was able to not only learn, but also learn about myself as a provider, as a young provider, and really get to see what that looks like and test out the waters a little bit more. Whereas when you're brand new in a clinic, it's hard to feel and see, where do I fit in? How do I try this? What do I do? But I got such a long period of time in her practice that I really got to be able to emulate and practice and see a wide variety of patients during that time. And so that really just kind of solidified that tinnitus is where I was headed and what I was going to do. That changed into attending otolaryngology conferences and neuro-otology conferences. And yes, I attend audiology conferences, but I usually get most of my tinnitus work out of non-traditional audiology content.
Wow, that's interesting.
We need more.
Yeah.
We also need to heavily move away from it's just the ear. It's not, it's the brain. And until we can really start shifting this and really start looking at it from this higher content level, looking down, the ear has incredible importance in this factor. And I'm not going to say the ear doesn't play an important role, but it's not the ear and it's not the ear's fault. And it's not really the brain's fault either, to be fair, but we can't look at it as an ear only, because when we are so focused on just an ear, we're missing the person, we're missing their underlying comorbidities, we're missing their underlying diagnoses and what's really going on with this person. Because with tinnitus, we've got, 25 million Americans that report tinnitus, but only 2 million Americans report bothersome tinnitus. Why is that number so huge, but why is our bothersome nature so small? And so then, you really start getting into it. We've got patients with sleep disorders, anxiety, depression disorders, and they have very common things that bother them, and their tinnitus is what really bothers them. But at the end of the day, it's that limbic system, it's their amygdala, it's their autonomic nervous system that's struggling. And that's not our ear. Our ear connects us to it. Our ear has a pathway to it, and we access the brain using our ear. If they have hearing loss, then of course we need to look at the auditory deprivation. Are we hitting those marks? Are we appropriately fitting those marks? Are we stimulating the auditory system? But I would say about 50% of my patients have completely normal hearing and yet still have debilitating tinnitus. And so we have to look beyond just the ear, utilizing the ear. How do we look at the brain? How do we look at the body, mind, physical relationship, and then work that in to what are we working with?
Totally.
And not just be so closed-minded to only see an ear, and then that's all that we see with an ear.
Yeah.
Now, the name of your clinic is Alaskan Hearing and Tinnitus Center, right?
Yes.
Now, a lot of clinics will actually put tinnitus in their name, but literally the only thing that they do is they say, oh, you have tinnitus, I'm going to put, hearing aids on your ears, or maybe use a tinnitus masker. But can you talk about your approach about, you treat tinnitus, you're not just masking the tinnitus, right?
Yes, I've more than once on stage gone out pretty boldly and said that masking is not tinnitus management. How I like to hide, not to say that there's not a time and a place for masking in principles, but masking in and of itself and just throwing sound in someone's ear is not tinnitus management. There needs to be the diagnostic portion in terms of a full diagnostic audiological evaluation. What is your auditory system looking like? Is there something underlying? Are we potentially looking at a unilateral problem? Is it binaural? Like what are we looking at, right? Because I can't technically look at you and say, oh, Rachel, you have tinnitus, any more than you can look at me.
I don't know. She looks like the type
she
of person
might.
who
I
would have
don't know.
tinnitus,
Are
so.
you high strung enough to maybe have a little bit on the side?
Oh, I know. I have a
Absolutely.
lot of tinnitus.
Perfect.
So yeah.
All of our type A'ers in the room.
Yeah.
All three of us. There we go.
Do you mind if I kind of jump in here and ask what your diagnostic evaluation does look like for a tinnitus patient, or perhaps what testing protocols are different between a tinnitus evaluation and just a standard hearing evaluation?
There's going to be a lot of variation in that.
Okay. Just based on patient to patient?
Based on patient to patient. Are they also hyperacusis and or potential mesophonic patient? If they are a hyperacusis patient, and some of our more significant tinnitus patients do have a lot of hypersensitivity, I'm not going to do certain tests, of which I'd like to do on some of my less significant sensitivity patients.
Sure.
To just not set them off the edge. Yes, I'd love to see what some of their LDLs are, but not at the expense of those individuals. Yes.
Sure.
So there's going to be a little bit more variability in general when it comes to that, just because the nature and the sensitivity and the reactivity is going to be a little bit different. So case history is always important, but it is extra crucial when you're working with a tinnitus patient.
Perhaps the most important part of this, for sure.
So we have different clinical subjective scales that we do, which kind of ranks them on a severity scale from slight to no handicap, mild, moderate, severe, and catastrophic. So we want to first look at that and make sure kind of where are you coming in from this. But then verbal report is also going to be crucial. They might not be honest on their case history, not because they're being malicious, but they are either terrified to admit how much they're struggling or putting it down on paper makes it real. And that can be really terrifying for some of these patients.
100%.
Some of them also know that they're really heavily struggling with suicidal ideations or they're struggling being able to put this into words because no one else understands what they're going through. And so motivational case history is imperative when you're working with this population. You have to be able to, how do you work on getting that information? How do you find out, are they safe? Can they trust me enough to put them in the booth? Do you trust me enough to be able to go through this path with me? I'm going to ask some hard questions, and we have to be okay with each other enough to have a hard statement, because sometimes it is hard.
Yeah, and you have to build that quickly.
Very quickly.
Right?
Yes, very quickly. I mean, some of my patients are actively suicidal, and we have to make very difficult and hard choices in those moments. And that's not easy to do when that's your first time interacting with somebody.
No.
But it's the right choice that has to be made. And so when you're kind of looking at it, you know, I kind of got like, ideally we'd like to do these things, and then some days we don't get to do all of them, and sometimes think of it like a kid. Some days is we got this piece this day, and then the next day we built this piece, and then maybe on the third visit we were able to get the next piece. And it just really kind of depends on how comfortable are they able to complete everything, what's their anxiety look like for that day, and be able to work on building that trust and rapport. So I'd like full audiogram, extended high frequencies if they have within normal limit thresholds. I'd like to test the extended highs to see is there maybe hearing loss in those higher areas that we're not looking within traditional areas. We have DPOAEs that we will do depending on kind of what we're looking at. If they have measurable hearing loss, I don't worry about the OAEs as much at that point, but if we are within our normal limit hearing parameter patients, we'll do the OAEs. I like to get LDLs if we can. Once again, that's not one that I'm willing to die on a hill over in my hyperacusis patients. TIMPs, if warranted, depending on their other side of their case history, TIMPs and reflexes based upon case history. Then we'll do tinnitus testing, so I forget the code off the top of my head, and I think it's 92567. Thank God for EMR, and I don't have to remember codes. I just type them and they all pop up. So you're going to pitch match residual, and then pitch matching, loudness matching, and then a masking portion of it to see if you can cover up, and then residual inhibition. So if I'm able to find this point that we find it, how long does it take until your brain kind of rediscovers it, so to say?
Goes back, yeah.
Can you work with tinnitus patients without that? Absolutely. Is it empowering for them, though, to know or have a loved one or a partner to say, that's my sound, here's what I'm experiencing? Or can you just leave that on for a minute and let them sit here
a minute? It's a big moment when you find it, because being able to put objective data points to something that they've been really having a hard time vocalizing and getting anyone to really understand where they're coming from.
Just
when you
the
do
moment
a good
of relief
when
face.
You do a good pitch match, level match, and they're like, oh, there, it's right there, it's that, and they're just like, oh, hallelujah, you found it.
We took something intangible and made it real to them.
Yeah, we put a data point there.
You know, it's certainly not a requirement, because it doesn't change necessarily what I'm doing on how am I working with them, but it does change if that is such an empowering moment for the patient to be able to say, here it is, this is real, this is what I'm experiencing, here's how we can do it. We can also use some of those measurements, though, to relationally talk with them. Here's where your hearing level was, here's where your loudness level came in for, here's how much sound it took for me to be able to manipulate that signal, here's how your brain responded to that, and talk to them. How are we going to use sound in a positive manner then? Because we're going to talk about adding sound into their environment, and we're going to talk about it rather than just throwing levels and throwing numbers in. Sound is a positive thing, and we're going to use a sound-enriched environment, and that's going to look a little different for different patients. And so providing them that information is an important aspect of that. But I also see patients from all over the country, which means I will sometimes see patients that come to me that have never had that pitch match portion completed, and that's okay too. It doesn't mean that we can't, as a tinnitus provider, work with somebody like that. If they really need that information, absolutely, let's find them a provider. If they're not in my geographical area or they're not able to come to my area, let's find you someone that can provide that. But it's certainly not it's certainly not a crucial aspect in being able to work with a tinnitus patient.
Right.
But it could be crucial for that tinnitus patient to tangibly have some information on themselves.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's where kind of weighing what does that look like can be a really important factor.
Sure.
If they have hearing loss, we need to talk about correcting the hearing loss. Because while, yes, we're talking about the brain and synapses and inappropriate kind of perception of how the brain is functioning, if we're not stimulating the auditory system and sending the appropriate signals up to the brain, we're going to be sending the brain inappropriate information.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the ear is a crucial portion in this, and we do need to send the brain appropriate information. And so often, for many tinnitus patients, just correcting their hearing loss is often the answer.
Is enough.
That's that 25 million who are like, yeah, I've got tinnitus. Then you hang out where I hang out pretty much most all day of my everyday, which is those
The 2
real
million
bothersome.
with the,
And so, you know, for the majority of patients, though, correcting their hearing loss is what they need. And so that's why, you know, we should start with what is the least version of intervention.
Yeah.
We have a clinical diagnosis of hearing loss. We now know that you have tinnitus, and we're able to correct that. That also sets you up for long-term success, both on auditory deprivation and correction standpoint, building strong cognitive rapport into the moving forward, keeping that signal strong, which is going to help the tinnitus in the long run. So that's the kind of point of least resistance, because it's a fairly straightforward process.
Right.
When you hang out where I do, which is in our 2 million bothersome patients per in the United States, it gets a little bit more convoluted.
Yeah, especially when they don't have hearing loss, right?
Sometimes they don't have hearing loss at all. And so sometimes we don't need to use hearing aids. Sometimes we do still use on-ear devices. Sometimes we don't use devices at all. Sometimes it's a matter of using our smartphones and using AirPods or using headphones. Sometimes it's a matter of just providing, how do we walk them through breathing activities, meditative exercises, counseling and information on what is going on, how can we work through this, identifying what trigger points are for this person, and how do we work through these different areas, and then identifying their difficult times of day, and then providing them sound appropriate environments. So I am much more of a fan of using nature style sounds than using any type of colored noise profile.
Yep.
What we often find is in the general patient population is noise is generally okay. And I say that in a very loose term because many of you will listen to this and be like, I love noise for my tinnitus patients. The reason I don't like to use colored noise when it comes to tinnitus management, and often is noise will work for a degree. But what happens is then they use a little bit more noise, and then a little bit more noise, and then a little bit more noise, and then suddenly they have out-noised themselves.
Yeah, it's almost like the habituation is
It just gets louder, louder,
ever-changing.
louder, louder. But the problem is the tinnitus is still here. You've not actually done anything with it, which is why masking is not an effective form of actual management. It can be a tool. Are there some patients that truly do need masking for certain moments of time? Absolutely. Are there some patients that need a little bit of relief in certain times? Yes. But that shouldn't be the long term, because hiding something isn't addressing the root of it. Hiding something isn't working on the brain's ability to habituate. Hiding it is not getting the person to a place of management and able to move forward. And so then what happens is you'll get these people that come in with these massively loud masking signals. So now we've got to worry about, have they potentially caused harm, because they don't care how loud it is. They will just keep applying more and more and more. And once you can't do it at an ear level, they will grab an over the ear level, they'll grab an extended speaker. There is no boundary for that. And so what happens is you have these people that have, think of it like our hyperacusis patients that never take out hearing protection, right?
They have earplugs in all the time. They
create a worse environment for themselves by hiding from all sounds, which just only sequesters the brain even further. So as they then start experiencing normal sounds that didn't used to bother them, even those become bothersome.
Right.
The more levels of like noise masking, noise, the brain doesn't have a way to work and filter through that. And so then they end up in that bothersome category, or they're already in that bothersome category, and it can be really precarious to wean them off some of that noise and take it away, because that is their safety net, and that can be terrifying. But we have to figure out, how do we reintegrate safe and appropriate sound, but then also in a manner that allows their brain to hear their tinnitus, but then also be able to work with their brain, work with their tinnitus, work with their ears to get them to a place that we can work on habituation, that we can work on sustaining rather than just hiding something.
Right.
And so, when we're looking at it from that perspective, noise, and that's why I'm pretty adamant about not using noise. And if you're not going to do the counseling aspect of tinnitus, do you understand what the patient is going through? Yes or no? Does the patient understand what is happening at a physiological level? Have you been able to talk to them about this? Do they have an understanding? Are they still coming from a place of fear? Are they coming from a place of reactivity? Kind of getting to the root of that. Do they have a psychologist or a psychiatrist on board? Do they have underlying mental health problems that are or are not being addressed?
Right.
Because that's a crucial aspect of it. If they have underlying mental health that's not being addressed, where we're not going to get very far with their tinnitus management.
100%.
Because we have an underlying mental health disorder that is able to be managed, that needs to be managed. Because if our limbic system and our brain is not at rest, how do we expect a brain at rest to find peace? There's so many different pieces, and we are not psychologists. That is not our area. But we can do co-managed care with that. We can also recognize, though, based on case history, based on conversations, based on our ability to work with our patients, someone that's struggling. We can recognize signs of anxiety. We can recognize signs of depression. We can recognize signs that someone is not doing well, or maybe they're not sleeping. We can recognize that someone is not in their best in that moment and be able to get them into that right type of provider to help with that, because we've got to find a way that all of those pieces kind of have to line up together, because it's not just a one-size-fits-all. It is a multiple faceted approach, and multiple types of providers need to be involved at that higher level tinnitus care. We're not just talking your routine, I have hearing loss, yeah, I've sometimes got tinnitus. That can stay in audiology very comfortably.
Yeah.
But when you're hanging out with the 2 million like myself and other colleagues, of those of us that spend our time just doing tinnitus, our world does not look
There's
like
a lot
what
more,
that looks like.
A lot more unpacking to do.
There's a whole
way
lot.
more unpacking to do, and it's kind of that idea of do not pass go, do not collect $200. We've got to unpack all of these root causes first.
I mean, sometimes
before we move on,
I can't even really be able to move on with them until I know that they have psychological or psychiatry on board.
Yeah.
And we have releases of information signed, so that if I were to identify something or their other provider were to identify something, that we can talk to each other as a safety net to say, I'm really concerned about this person. When is your next session with them? Or I really need you to get this person in. We have some things, we had a really hard session today. We worked on them. We made some changes. They're not adjusting well to those changes. Or something happened at home that has nothing to do with me or you or them or anything, and they're not doing well. And this is now negatively going to have an impact on every other aspect of their life. And so you have to have that really good working relationship with mental health especially, but with these other areas of care. Often these patients are on a myriad list of medications. We are not their medical manager when it comes to their prescriptions, but we do need to know what they're taking. We do need to know what the involvement is. We need to recognize something's different. Oh, you've stopped taking your meds. Does your prescribing provider know you've stopped doing? Like we may not be the ones doing that side of it, but we need to be aware of it. We need to be managing and looking at it from that angle, and then recognizing, how do we get you back to this person? How do we encourage you to speak to that person? Or even calling that provider and saying, hey, they are not taking the medicines as appropriately provided, or they're changing things up, their behavior's looking different. We need to get them back involved in you. I am limited on what I can do when they're not doing that, but I can make sure that we have the right people on board so that we can loop it back in there, because their mental health is pretty impacted. I would say about 85% of my caseload tends to have suicidal ideations at almost all times.
Wow.
And so when you're working with a population that is fairly precarious and not often thriving, those are things that need to be prevalent, that we're looking for and that we're watching for and being cognizant of, because I don't get to not be aware of those things, because that could be, you might give me a little sign that you're not okay, and if I'm not being open and I'm not hearing you and I'm not being receptive to that, or I plow through ahead on my plan for the day, but your plan was saying I'm not comfortable with that, those are all things that are really crucial to this. So, when we're in this side of audiology, it's a very different landscape than what we do. It's also incredible, and it's wonderful to work with those patients, but it is a bit of a different puzzle. It's not necessarily what they prepared us for when we went to school in any capacity.
No, it's pretty clear that you're on a different level when it comes to this treatment of tinnitus thing. In fact, you were identified as being one of the leaders in the profession, so much so that a company called Neuromod actually invited you out to learn more about their Lenire tinnitus treatment device. So can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
So Neuromod is a company out of Dublin, Ireland, and they just received US FDA approval in March of 2023. They've had approval in Ireland and parts of the EU since 2019. So new to the US, not as new over into the European Union, and it is a bimodal neuromodulation device. So first device of its kind in tinnitus. That's pretty fun, pretty cool. How that worked in terms of myself and my colleagues that were chosen to be what we're calling phase 1 providers is the team, the Neuromod team, picked tinnitus providers across the country that do full-time tinnitus management. This is what we do. This is not a part-time thing. We have a very well in place protocol that we could add this device into our protocol, and we weren't reinventing the wheel to work with this device, so to say. And so, being able to add in this new device has been really fun. It is working really well in general. So clinical trials show it to be between like 80 and 85% effectiveness, and we are holding very well true to those numbers, which in tinnitus patients is an incredibly high number of success.
That is.
Can you tell the viewers who may have tinnitus, and I think it's intended for moderate to severe levels of tinnitus, right? You wouldn't go and use this device most likely on someone with a very mild form of tinnitus, but like what are you actually doing with the device?
So you are correct. Moderate or more significant is the target help rate group, and the reason for that is when they were gaining who gains benefit is the goal is to have a clinically significant benefit from using the device. When you're in more of that mild to either lesser than category, it's not to negate that you have tinnitus, and your tinnitus might bother you, and absolutely it can and it might, but thankfully it's not at such a severe level that we need to go to this level of device.
Right.
There are other levels of effective tinnitus management tools that can be used in those lesser degrees of severity for tinnitus patients very effectively. So for this device, it is more set to our moderates to our more significant degrees. So it's two pieces, so the bimodal. So you have a tongue tip stimulator, it sets on your tongue, and then you have a pair of over-the-ear headphones. And so it is programmed based on your audiogram. So you can have completely normal hearing, and then there is a fitting range of hearing loss. So you can have hearing loss. There are some people though that might have too much hearing loss. So there is a fitting range. It's a fairly generous range though, to be fair. That's not been a general problem. For the most part, many ranges can fit. And so your audiogram is plugged in. You do not wear your hearing aids during the treatment because we program the audiogram in, and those degrees of loss are corrected through the headphones. And so you have the tongue tip stimulator in, you have the headphones on, and there's two different programs in the US. The most common program has this like myriad of sounds built into it. So think spa music. There will be some windy white noise, like an oceany sound. There's some tones, some different pitches. Some are quick in succession to high, some go back down to low, and the intensities change. The more intense the sound profile, the more intense the tongue tip stimulation is. Less intense here, less intense here. So think like light vibration. It's not sharp, it's not painful, it's not stingy. It's kind of dancey and tingly on your tongue. No part of it is uncomfortable, not even mildly uncomfortable. It's super soft stimulation. But the louder it is, the more that you will feel this, and vice versa. It also modulates during the session, and so at some points it will be louder, at some points it will be softer, and it's a very broadband signal. And that's because tinnitus is changing. It's a range. Very few people have only one exact sound that never varies based upon their degree. And so with this device, they've got all these different sounds that you're able to put in here. So the science behind it is the sounds are very intentional, the types of signals, the length of the sounds that are in there. There's a lot that went into what are you hearing. So 60 minutes a day is what's recommended for treatment. Most patients do 2 30-minute listening sessions. So we recommend sitting and relaxing. We recommend either meditation or quiet activities. So we'll talk about doing something light and fluffy. So coloring, reading something fun for pleasure, like word searches. I've got some patients that have taken up like model car painting. I've got someone that quilts. So totally fun. This is not a stressful time. We're not watching TV. We're not competing. We're not doing our taxes. We're not working. We're not doing emails. We're keeping all stressful things away. We're not reading the world news. And, we jokingly say
You'd be out of luck.
Yeah, you'd be in trouble.
Yeah.
But the reason for that is your brain already has a negative perception of your tinnitus. And with bimodal neuromodulation, we are working on providing your brain a signal and shifting that signal into a neutral zone.
Mm-hmm.
How do I help your brain work on repositioning that signal if you're stimulating your brain with a negative stimuli external from the device? And so we really want to keep that a safe, protected place. So if you just want to sit back and relax, great. If you need an activity because you can't just sit still for those 30 minutes, that's okay too. But it does really need to be a nice and light activity and not something that's super strenuous, because we don't want to be counterproductive to what the treatment is working on at that time.
We really need to be able to kind of
just take it in.
Take it in. I guess anecdotally, I don't know if they've done any like research on this yet, but do you think that some of the reductions in tinnitus that you've seen and some of the impacts on tinnitus perception that you've seen, do you think some of that in part is just from the fact that they are designating 30, 60 minutes a day to just being quiet, still, and relaxing and breathing?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that absolutely we are terrible about giving ourselves 5 minutes of a break, much less an hour every day.
Yeah.
In fact, so in general, we recommend a 12-week starting program for treatment. We have patients that use this device longer for 12 weeks, but 12 weeks is kind of our starting protocol. I have so many patients at the end of 12 weeks who are like, I'm not giving up my hour.
No.
I'm not giving it up, because you just don't realize that we never give ourselves time. No phone, no screen, no work, no obligations, just do whatever you want to do for an hour. And I mean, when's the last time you did that? Or you or myself?
I don't know.
Right?
I enjoy this, so.
Yeah, but so when we're looking at that, they're giving themselves that time. They're taking the quiet time. They have worked it into their routine that it has dedicated them quiet time. And so, coming from that perspective, I do think that's a lot of it. Relaxation is a big part of it. Walk through things that we're working through my patients is breathing exercises, how to slow respiration rates, how to do different meditation style exercises that you can do during that. Some patients will do light activity, like they'll do yoga stretches or different things. So you don't have to sit and be completely still, but we also don't want you raising your cortisol levels. So we're not doing high intensity exercises.
No.
We're not trying to bebop around. We're not riding our Peloton. We're not doing things like that.
No Orange Theory classes.
Nope, we're not doing any of that.
Mid-treatment. Okay.
Yeah, but I do have some patients that like just take a little stroll. There's nothing wrong with that. So, there's activities and giving them that dedicated time. But the other aspect is they're also giving themselves something to do over something that they felt they've had so little control over for such a long time. So having the ability to say, I am consciously doing something for myself, for my tinnitus. That's another big aspect of it. There's also a lot of counseling that goes into that. So I think anytime that you can empower someone to feel that they are in control of making those choices, they are doing something for the positive for themselves. They have a team behind them that if they are having a bad day, or they're just going, you know what, today is not a great day for me. Great, call my team. That's what we're here for. We're here to walk you through those hard moments rather than feeling like they're so isolated and alone, like so many of those tinnitus patients that do not have friends and family in their space that understand what debilitating tinnitus is. They've now got an office or a team or a protocol or a group that they can reach out and say, hey, I met you when we did a group session. Could we be tinnitus buddies? Similar to how in groups like AA or in NA and stuff, they'll have sponsors. I've got some of my patients hooked up with each other to just reach out when they're having a bad day.
Yeah.
So sometimes building that support can be a really big aspect, and sometimes we are that support, and sometimes we can pass on that support to other patients that have done well with each other.
So it sounds like this device, this Lenire device, has been an effective tool for you to incorporate in the other stuff that you've already been doing. What would you say to the individual who has tinnitus who just thinks that this is the magical cure for them?
I wish there was a magical cure, but there is not. There is not a cure for tinnitus. And when we're talking about that, we have to look at back to the brain. Our brain is having an inappropriate perception of an internal signal that's happening. but I also need your brain to keep functioning, and I need your brain to keep having these perceptions and these feelings and these responses. We can work on redirecting your brain and having more appropriate response. We can work on giving your brain appropriate auditory stimulation and working through these different things, and we can bring your tinnitus into a much more comfortable, manageable, and even successful position. But realistically, 0 is not our goal. And so I think being really realistic with where are we setting you up for, what are our goals? Our goals might be some quieter times. Our goals might be, okay, I still have tinnitus, but I don't need to be so overwhelmed by it, or I can move it back here rather than having it here. What, and that's different for every patient, and I can't necessarily, pick what their goals are because they all have different ones. But we have to realistically come up with what is it for each patient, and then how do we make that their reality, and then work through that towards them. But it is not a cure. It does take time. This is not a put it on tomorrow, all my life problems are solved. Is it a very effective tool? Yes, it is an effective tool. But part of that effectiveness is following up with the treatment plan with the provider that you're working with, following the protocols, putting it on, and then doing your email and your work and your taxes and all of those things. That is taking away from the ability to be as effective. And so while that may seem like, oh, I'm just emailing, you might be just emailing, but we're taking away the brain's ability to work on part of that neuromodulation process every time we're deviating from whatever was recommended in that. So while it is an effective tool, and I have seen it be an effective tool in wonderful situations, implementation of is important, follow-up care is important. You also might need adjustments similar to working with hearing aid devices. And just because it works for you doesn't mean it works exactly the same for you. And so we might have to make a change. We might need to make an adjustment. You might not be able to be a 60-minute person at once. You might need 2 30 minutes. We might find for you, early in the morning is a better time for your brain to do this type of treatment. And then for you might do fabulous with it before bed, and you might say, oh my gosh, I would never be able to go to sleep if I did it at bedtime. And then I've got other patients who we use it as a tool to help transition into sleep mode because they do so wonderfully with it at night that it helps them go to sleep. I have just as many patients who can't do it after dinner time because it overstimulates them and keeps them up at night. And so that's where working with a provider that's knowledgeable with whatever device you're using and or treatment plan, and then being familiar with you as a person and your tinnitus and what those things look like to how to work through them, because it really is individual. So that's where follow-up care is crucial. If you don't feel like you have a good match with your provider, go find a different provider, get a second opinion. We're not always all perfect matches for each other. That is okay, actually.
It is okay.
If I can't be the best provider for you, that is okay, but let me help you find a different one. Or I don't have to help you find a different one either if you feel like that wouldn't be, that's an okay thing too. We've all had to get different providers at some times in our life. So find a provider that works, that you're comfortable with, but go back to that provider or find a new one. But having that relationship with your tinnitus provider is extremely crucial in this process.
Yeah, I think it brings up a really good point of a lot of times when we have conditions or things that we want fixed or helped, we're so used to this idea of adding other things on. So, I'm going to take a medication for it, and I'm going to have to start exercising, I'm going to have to start eating better, and all of these things. But it's almost like this treatment therapy is taking things away. Do less. Do fewer things. I need you to be quiet, still, and just kind of relax.
We're terrible at.
In all the things that we're super, super terrible at.
Especially the type of people that tinnitus is bothersome to them.
Yes,
exactly.
Our super high-strung type A in general profile patients.
Who are the ones that are like,
nightmare is to sit still and do nothing.
It is. It really
Literally.
is. And then they're like, okay, I want this cure. And what I will often equate tinnitus to for an individual who hears that there's no cure for it and gets immediately really kind of crushed by that, right? I equate tinnitus to like nausea. There's nothing I can give you. There's no pill, there's no medication that I can give you that is ever going to eliminate nausea as a factor in your entire life. To the fact that you'll never have it again. Your stomach will never hurt again in your life.
Wouldn't that be lovely?
Right? It would be great. It would be awesome. But I can't promise that. And in the same way with tinnitus, you're going to have periods where the tinnitus is stronger. You're going to have periods where the tinnitus is not as noticeable to you. There's nothing I can give you that will throw tinnitus away forever. But we can certainly manage it in the same way that nausea can also be managed too. So sometimes that parallel helps with like, oh, I do have other things that ail me sometimes, but they don't make a huge impact on my life and they can be managed.
And we'll
That's
talk
what
about
we mean
that
by no cure.
You have tinnitus. And I'll say, like, that's okay to say that you have tinnitus, but tinnitus doesn't have to be your life.
Yeah.
So how do we have tinnitus, but then what else are you?
Right.
And so we'll start finding out, okay, well, this is more important, and this is more important, and these, and we start building that, and then slowly we can bring tinnitus farther back, because we all have lots of things. But what do we let be kind of our defining or our shining moment in that? But yeah, no, absolutely, because they're still going to have tinnitus.
Yep.
And that's okay. But tinnitus doesn't have to be the start of their story anymore. We can move it. We can help them get it to where it's not at that level. But it does take work.
Yep.
And then it's Thanksgiving, and then it's Christmas, and then it's super stressful, and then they're like, "What the heck? I've been doing so well." And you're like, "Yeah, have you met Q4 in the United States?
Yeah.
It's a blast.
Welcome.
It's a really fun time here." But in reality, we know we've got certain times of year that are more stressful, or they go through an unexpected job change, or they have a big life partner change, and those are unexpected things. But life is about unexpected things, and we cannot predict all of them. And so empowering them with the ability to say, "Hey, when you have something like this happen, what are the tools that we now know work for you? We know that you have the skill set to work on these. How do we implement them so that rather than letting your tinnitus get here again, what are the steps that we do to help alleviate that before you feel like you're back at square one?"
Yeah, and how to break that thought pattern before it gets, instead of letting it get all the way up to an 8 out of 10, and then it's like, okay, what are my tools again? What do I use?
Because
it's like
at that point, they're not able to think clearly because they're in desperation mode.
Yeah, you're stressed, you're desperate. And
understandably.
if you can get to a 3 on that scale and recognize, that's a little higher than it was yesterday, and I have techniques to work through this. I have breathing exercises, I have real life exercises, I have meditation practices to keep it at a 3 or to put it back down where it was before it gets to that point.
And sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out for each patient, and then letting them know, like, this is your toolkit. This is your toolkit. Here's how we're going to use it. We might use some of these tools often.
Yep.
We might not use some of these tools often, and here's how we go through life, because I can't predict my life any more than you can predict yours, and I certainly can't predict theirs. And so when we're going through there, we know, okay, this is a good sign that I need to implement this, or, ooh, I've kind of gotten lazy about my nighttime routine, so I need to get back into this because I've started to notice that my sleep patterns are getting a little bit more poorly, or I'm starting to wake, and that's how we just start working through that identification. So how do we use this toolkit that we have found to be effective for each person? And it might have similarities, it might have a myriad of different things, and for some people's toolkits, it might be that they regularly need to go to the gym for physical exercise. It might be that they are better at this type of thing versus that. It might be that they need a 15-minute quiet time before bed to help with, it might be different, but as their tinnitus is doing better, they are less dedicated to doing those continued activities, and then it gets a little messy again. So we have to pull back out that kit and say, okay, which ones do we start back up with again, and how do we keep working through that process?
Well, if there's one thing that I think the viewers has probably gleaned from this conversation, it's that this stuff's complicated, and you likely need guidance and help when going through this, especially if you're in that 2 million people category of debilitating levels of tinnitus. So I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation for sure. And so if there are individuals watching this right now, which if I had to bet money, I would say there's people watching this that are like, I need to get a hold of you because I need your help. So what would you tell them? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
My website is the best way to get a hold of us. You can text us through there. You can email us through there. And my team is very good about getting back to everybody through our website. Our website is allearsalaska.com. And if you find us on there, and like I said, you can send us a message and we will get back to you.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the show with us today. It's been a pleasure having you, coming all the way down from Alaska, literally to just do this.
Oh my gosh.
Which we greatly appreciate, and the viewers greatly appreciate. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
All right, guys, that is it for today's episode. If you enjoyed it, make sure that you hit that like button. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel with notification turned on, go ahead and do that as well. And we will see you next time.